Good evening and welcome to the League of Women Voters of Utah's webinar on the Colorado River. My name is Norma Wills and I will be moderating the discussion this evening. We're going to wait just a couple of more minutes for one of our panelists to sign on. It looks like he's having some technical difficulties, so if you can just hold on for a short while, we'll get started. Thank you. Well, maybe we should go ahead and hope that those technical difficulties can be resolved. Just a little bit about the League. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan, volunteer, grassroots organization that is dedicated to protecting voting rights and educating voters on public policy issues. We recently completed a report on current water issues in Utah as an update to earlier League studies. We identified two main priorities: Great Salt Lake, that was discussed in a webinar on September 28th, and the Colorado River that we're discussing tonight. The main takeaways from the report are that both systems are in crisis, that water conservation is the least costly and most easily implemented solution, and that one record-breaking winter of precipitation will not resolve our long-term water issues. Population growth and a warming climate will continue to stress water supplies. We will need all stakeholders to come together to figure out how to equitably distribute diminishing water resources so that we can learn to live within our water means. Tonight we have three panelists, Candice Hasenyager, Hannah Fries, and Paul Sosi, who will share their perspectives on conserving water and on tribal concerns in the governance of the Colorado River system. Candice Hasenyager is the director of Utah Division of Water Resources and a member of the Colorado River.This of Utah board. She is committed to helping find balanced solutions to ensure Utah families have reliable water supply and that agriculture and businesses can be successful and that the environment can prosper. Hannah Fries is the manager of the Agricultural Water Optimization Program. She is a graduate of Utah State University and has worked as a conservation planner in Logan, Ogden, and Tremonton. Paul Sosi is Dene and is the tribal representative on the Colorado River Authority Board. He previously served as the U.S. Department of the Interior Indian Affairs Chief of Staff and has owned his own law practice for 20 years. Our format tonight will be a brief introduction to the Colorado River Basin, followed by 15-minute presentations by our panelists and the remaining time for questions. Please submit your questions using the Q&A feature. Jan Streifel will monitor and ask the questions. I'll start off with some background. I'm just going to share my screen here quickly, I hope. Oh, there we are. Sorry. There we go, sorry. Okay, So I'll start off with some background. Water is measured in acre feet. An acre foot is the amount of water that covers a 1 acre area with 1 foot of water, or approximately 326,000 gallons. It's enough to supply approximately 2 households for a year. What's shown here is a map of the Colorado River Basin. The basin supplies water to 40 million people in the US and Mexico. 30 federally recognized tribes live within the basin and rely on its water. The system is divided into the upper basin, comprised of Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico. And the lower basin comprised of California, Arizona, and Nevada. The 2 largest reservoirs in the basin are Lake Powell and Lake Mead, each of which is currently about 1/3 full. And you can see there are lots of tributaries to the main branch of the Colorado River that eventually empties into the Gulf of California. Let's see, next slide. Okay. In 1922, a compact among the 7 basin states allocated 7.5 million acre feet of water per year to both the upper and lower basins. At the time, the annual flow in the river was thought to be 16.4 million acre feet per year. In the lower basin, each state was guaranteed a specific volume of water. California receiving 4.4 million acre feet per year, Arizona receiving 2.8 million acre feet per year, and Nevada 0.3 million acre feet per year. The upper basin states were not allotted specific amounts, but could use the water left after fulfilling obligations to Arizona, the lower basin, and Mexico. In 1948, the upper basin states agreed to divide their portion by percentages. Colorado to receive 51.75%, Utah 23%, Wyoming 14%, and New Mexico 11.25%. No consideration was given to the ancient water rights of Native Americans in the 1922 compact. The average flow in the river in the years between 2000 and 2023 was 12.5 to 13.6 million acre feet per year. During the same time period, total basin use, including evaporative losses, averaged 15.1 million acre feet per year. So there was a deficit every year for those 23 years. Without addressing the annual deficits, the reservoirs in the system will continue to be depleted, possibly affecting hydroelectric generation at Glen Canyon and Hoover Dams that supplies electricity to hundreds of thousands of homes. Utah uses approximately 1 million acre feet per year of Colorado River water per year. Approximately 70% is used for agriculture and the rest for municipal and industrial purposes. 60% of Utahns use Colorado River water, and it is a key source of water for the Wasatch Front. Since 2008, the management of the Colorado River system has been directed by interim guidelines and additional drought contingency plans. However, the guidelines expire at the end of 2025, so a new agreement must be reached. The question is how to balance the needs of all water users, including Native tribes and the environment, that were left out of the 1922 compact. Let's see, I need to stop my sharing here. There we go. With that brief and vastly oversimplified introduction to the Colorado River Basin, let's hear from our panel, starting with Candice Hasenyager.
Good evening. Thank you, Norma. Really appreciate all of you spending time on your Tuesday evening to learn and talk and discuss some of the critical water issues that we face in our state. Just want to make sure, can you see my slides or did I not? I don't think I shared it quite right. Hold on. I just tested this. You would think I would have this down by now. There we go. I got a little trigger happy and hit the slideshow button before I shared it all the way. So thanks again for being here. I'm going to just briefly cover some of the highlights of some of the reservoir elevations, and then also really what can we do to help reduce how much water we use and make ourselves more drought resilient. So this has been a crazy 23 years on the Colorado River, and in the last couple of years across the state. In 2021, the whole state was an extreme or exceptional drought. It was actually like 99.94%, but I'm an engineer and significant figures matter, so we round up to 100% in that extreme and exceptional drought category. As Norma alluded, we had an amazing year this last winter, and you can see by the current reservoir chart on the right that it's really bumped up all our numbers. If we looked at this chart last year, it was all red and oranges, where our reservoir levels were low across the state. And it's important, even when talking about the Colorado River, that you look at the statewide perspective, because as Norma mentioned, about 60% of Utahns get Colorado River water through some major infrastructure and transbasin diversions projects that bring Colorado River water into the Wasatch Front. So if you live in Sandy, you're drinking Colorado River water too. And so you can see here on this graphic, Lake Powell currently is at about 36% of capacity. As of, just a few days ago, the elevation was at 3573. So we saw an increase of almost, I think it was almost 65 feet this last runoff season, which was an amazing amount of water. At the end of the day, we know it's not one good year is not going to solve us of our woes. Currently statewide, if you look at the statewide average, it's about 74% for our reservoir levels. So now if we go on to this kind of next, I wanted to show this kind of historical perspective of kind of where we've been. And it's probably a similar story to Great Salt Lake. If you guys just had a presentation on that, you can see when the dam was put into place in the 60s and the initial fill in the 80s, similar to when Great Salt Lake was hitting record highs, we saw record highs at Lake Powell. I remember seeing pictures of them putting up plywood on the spillway to try to hold back the water, right? And then we know we've seen a very different story over the last 40 years since that time, as the reservoirs continue in Lake Powell and Lake Mead. I don't have Lake Mead on this chart, but both of them have declined over the years. And then we see that big increase from this one year. One of the interesting things to note is that, a lot of the time in the last couple of years, because of extremely dry soil conditions, even if our winter snowpack wasn't terrible, it was like 80 or 90%, the runoff efficiency was so low because those dry soils kind of act like a sponge, is how I kind of envision it, where they will soak up the water before letting it run off. And so that reduces what we call the runoff efficiency of our snow melt. So and you can kind of see that in those last couple of years where there's very little inflows going in to Lake Powell, or very little elevation changes in this chart. Okay. One of the other things that I wanted to share with you is kind of what are the projections out into the future. The Bureau of Reclamation runs 24-month projections where they look at kind of where we're at today. And so that's this kind of black line. And this once again is Lake Powell and the pool elevations. They have some specific tiers based on different agreements and things. But if we kind of focus in on projecting forward out into 23, the rest of 23, 24, and 25, you can see there's these three different lines. The green is the most probable inflow with Lake Powell, and with the assumption that there's a release of 7.48 million acre feet in water year 2024. And then a 9 million acre foot release in water year 2025. And so this is kind of what that most probable would look like. And then depending on what the inflows are, whether they're high or they're low, There's the maximum inflow probability in that blue line, and then there's the red line that shows the minimum probable. And so these are, estimates into the future. And to be honest, it really depends. It's one of the areas that we can improve our seasonal and subseasonal forecast to understand what these projections are. But I think it is, a rough estimate of where we could be in the next couple of years. It also depends a lot on management strategies, how much water comes in, how much water is released, how much water evaporates, all of those type of things. One of the interesting things that happens this last year is the reinitiation of the System Conservation Pilot Project. And this was an effort that the Upper Colorado River Commission led in conjunction with the Upper Basin states. This program is voluntary, temporary, and compensated, and looking for short-term leases of water rights across Upper Basin states. There was an application period, and there was a number of applications that came in. There were 64 projects for the whole Upper Basin states, so Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico. 20 of those projects were in Utah. The estimated conserved volume was about, for all of the 4 states, was about 38,000 acre feet, and in Utah particularly about 15,000 acre feet. The price per acre foot ranged between, for the whole Upper Basin states, $420 per acre foot, and in Utah was about $360. This recently, the UCRC has had 2 special meetings, and they have recently made a commitment and authorized to do another system conservation pilot project in 2024. They do anticipate having an earlier application period and a more streamlined process. There were definitely some hiccups and some lessons learned, but overall, I think they felt it was a good investment, and they want to continue it into next year. So that's really good. This is a different type of chart, and I should have had this above. This is looking at a 5-year probabilistic projection. So this is kind of going out, before we talked about that 2-year period. This is really going out to, right now, out to 2028. One of the things I wanted to note about this chart is based on the 2007 guidelines that were passed, that all of those guidelines and operations agreement expire in 2026. And so you can see this kind of dark gray ominous line and a gray kind of afterward. There's a lot of I guess uncertainty in that 5-year projection is, what does the new policies look like post 2026? And that's one of the efforts of, our river commissioner, Gene Shawcroft, as well as the other 6 basin states in conjunction with Utah, are trying to come, and the Bureau of Reclamation, come to an agreement of what are those post 26 guidelines, and how will the river be run past that time. So that's just something to keep a note and keep in your kind of back pocket of, there's some changes afoot. There was a notice of intent issued by the Bureau of Reclamation. Utah provided 3 different opportunities to comment, once as part of the 7-state letter, once as part of the UCRC letter, and then we submitted our own state of Utah letter. So we want to make sure that we're at the table. And as a board member at the Colorado River Authority, we are, and with my co-board member, Paul Sosi, we are working with the Colorado River to make sure that we're making the best opportunities for Utah into the future. So one of the questions that I get asked all the time is, how do we become more drought resilient? And I kind of put it into 3 different buckets. One is, we really got to use less water across all sectors. No longer can we pit one sector from another. we all have to do our part, whether we're in ag, and my friend at UDAF, the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food, Hannah Fries, is going to talk all about that program, or whether we're in our municipal setting or an industrial setting, we all need to figure out how to use less water, because with the impacts that we have because of climate change and drought, and just more extremes in our hydrology, I think we need to become more resilient, and we do that by using less water. And then another bucket that I like to put it in is coordination and collaboration. I think we need to make our tables bigger and bring more people in, to make sure that we're making the best decisions. I took a short course on collaboration at the Environmental Dispute Resolution Center. And one of the things that they like to say is you got to go slow to go fast sometimes. Sometimes you need to bring on people on board, kind of get on the same page, agree on the data, build relationships, and then you can move forward in a much more holistic and comprehensive kind of manner. So I think that's a real opportunity we have to improve upon. And then innovation. I recently got an opportunity to go to Israel to learn how they went from being really a water stressed area to being fairly water rich. And they did that a lot through innovation. And we may not be able to innovate exactly the same ways as Israel, but I think there's a lot of opportunities to innovate more. So those are a few things that I think that we can do. The last couple of years, because of the drought, because of the tension on water, from whether it's from the Great Salt Lake to the Colorado River side, there has been an extraordinary amount of money that the legislature has appropriated as part of the two different legislative sessions. About $1 billion was appropriated for water and water conservation. About $476 million of that went to my agency. And so here's an update on one of those efforts. And this is there was about $268 million that was appropriated for secondary metering. So what we found over the years is that by just metering someone and then telling them how much they use, there's about a 20 to 30% reduction in water use without even changing the price signal, by just providing the information. The legislature caught on to this and really wanted to support and require those secondary systems to start, if they haven't started already, to meter all of their secondary connections. And this is at the individual home. And they have also put in a deadline to have this metering completed by 2030. And so there was a $268 million appropriation, a part of this. I'm happy to report at our last board meeting, which this has not been updated since then, which it was just about a week ago, the board has fully appropriated the $268 million for secondary metering and water conservation projects. We have over 170 million contracted. And there's a bunch of meters going into the ground right now. We had some reports out, and I'm looking forward to getting some additional reports for the legislative session on how many meters are in the ground. But pretty exciting stuff there. We estimate that it'll save about 50,000 acre feet every year if everyone was fully metered. So something that we're continuing to work toward. One of the other things that the legislature has funded is a landscaping incentive program. And so this is an effort to remove thirsty grasses and put in place water-wise landscaping and drip irrigation. Right now, we have over 2 million square feet of grass that's already been converted. We have over 3,700 applications. So the Division of Water Resources and our partners with Water Conservancy Districts, Weber Basin, Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District, Central Utah, and Washington County Water Conservancy District are working hard to make these changes. One of the things I'll note is that we do require that the city in which a resident lives in has adopted water efficiency standards. And this is really important for new development, that they are going in water wise to begin with, and so that we're not constantly chasing our tail. So that is a requirement of the program. I'm happy to give you guys more details about that if you're interested. Another thing that came out of this legislative session is Utah Waterways. This is an effort to create a public-private partnership to promote and educate on water conservation and really water in general. So we have organized the board and then hired an executive director, Tage Flint, and that is up and going and working toward having websites and all of those things, and start that process. So really looking forward to continuing to work with Utah Waterways. We're also hosting Growing Water Smart workshops, and this is an effort to get land use planners and water planners together and to get them planning and making good decisions going into the future. One of the things that I like to say is that how we grow today makes decades of water decisions to come. And so the more we can grow water-wise today, that's going to save water way into the long term. And so this is an effort to do just that by bringing those land use planners and water planners together in a workshop setting. Cloud seeding, and a significant amount of money was put toward cloud seeding this last legislative session. About $17 million, $5 million of which will be ongoing. So we're going to start aerial cloud seeding. We did that last year in Southern Utah. We're working to manufacture and get the remote operate generators out in the field so that they're in places where we don't have a manual person to come run them. And then we're studying new cloud seeding areas. So that's a big investment of our time and an investment from the legislature. We do find that it increases the snowfall between 4 and 10%, depending on the area. So we do see that is a valuable way to try to get more, snow to fall from the sky. And that's kind of a quick overview. I tried to keep it about 15 minutes, so there was plenty of time for our co-panelists to present, and looking forward to answering questions. I don't know if we're doing that after or if you want to do that now, Norma.
I think we're going to hold the questions till later, if that's all right.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you so much, Candice. So as Candice pointed out, a huge percentage of our water is used for agriculture. And so if we're going to make meaningful conservation efforts, I think agriculture has to be a big piece of the puzzle. So we'll invite Hannah to explain what the state is doing along those lines. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. If you could just give me a nod if you could see my screen. Let me see if I can get this in a slideshow here. Thank you so much. Thank you, Norma. I appreciate being here today and the opportunity. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about our agricultural water optimization program. Agriculture is my heart and soul, and I am so happy to be able to represent our farmers and ranchers who have a big lift and play a big role in the things that we're doing in the state of Utah to conserve water. So I would like to just start with a brief overview of the program. I pulled these purpose statements straight from the program policy that we operate under legislatively. I love that one of the very first goals that we have of the agricultural water optimization program is to maintain viable agriculture while also reducing water depletion and enhancing availability. So we still do have a focus on being able to focus on our farmers and ranchers who make a living with the water that they either own or have a share in and have a right to use. One of the major shifts that we had in this last legislative session with Senate Bill 277 was the opportunity for our producers to have saved water, which is a new definition that we've been working on. We don't even have it established yet. It's still very brand new. We're working through the process with the state engineer and her shop to be able to define what saved water is and where saved water can be generated from these water optimization projects. Which will provide protections for our producers if they conserve water, that it protects their water rights and water shares, that they wouldn't be subject to forfeit if a change application is filed And then a huge piece of the puzzle that we have through water optimization program is real-time metering. So every single one of our projects that we have funded over the last 4 years has a real-time meter installed as part of the project that will show measurement of water use. And then those savings will be documented in cubic feet per second or in acre feet of water used. So the program focuses, like I mentioned, on helping agricultural producers install more efficient systems. It results in less water being diverted by irrigation systems or less water depleted for agricultural water use. The way the program works is a 50-50 cost share. So through Department of Ag and Food, we provide 50% of the total project cost, and the other 50% is up to the landowner to come up with. We have a great partnership with some of our federal partners, like the Natural Resources Conservation Service has been a wonderful partner to help bring some federal dollars to offset the farmers' 50% cost share. We've also worked with partners such as the Nature Conservancy. We've worked with private partners, Procter and Gamble, and some other partners. So we've had a great opportunity for other partners to invest in water conservation for our agricultural producers as well. Every project is required to install new materials. That just gives a good project life, and we just ensure that things won't wear out quicker than we anticipate. Each applicant can request up to $500,000, which would be or half of their project cost. So if their project costs $1 million, they can request up to $500,000 from the water optimization program. Through the program, we withhold 20% of the total grant amount until the project is completed. So we can pay along the way, but we withhold 20% to ensure project completion. Like I mentioned, we have real-time water metering that is required and installed on every completed project. And then after project implementation, we require 3 years of annual reporting to be submitted to the Department of Ag and Food. And we start that at the beginning of the next irrigation season. So for example, we have some producers that are in the middle of installing projects right now. We don't require annual reporting until they have a full irrigation season with their new system under their belt. And then we'll do those 3 years of annual reporting. We're really excited. Over the last several months, we've been able to hire some more staff around the state. So we do have 4 agricultural water optimization planners. We have one located in Cache County, one in Box Elder County, and then we have 2 stationed out of the Richfield office, one that covers the Uinta Basin and the Colorado River Basin, devoted specifically to that area, and then one that covers central and southern Utah. So with bringing on those planners, that's been a huge help to help our producers do their annual reporting, install meters, and then make sure that these projects are being installed smoothly and correctly. So one of the things that is so unique about Utah is we have just such a wide variety of irrigation methods that we use across the state. So we get asked quite often, what's the most common practice that you're seeing? And the answer is it really depends on where you're located in the state. In northern Utah, we're implementing some really fantastic and innovative flood irrigation systems, some surge flood irrigation systems that are all automated with soil moisture sensors. In Cache County, we have a lot of our canal companies that are moving to pressurized systems. And so we're transitioning from flood systems to sprinklers there. In central, southern, and eastern Utah, most of the water that is used for agricultural irrigation, or a large portion, comes from groundwater or is through pressurized canal systems. So we have a lot of sprinkler systems going in those areas, whether they be pivots or wheel lines, some drip systems, but typically pivots and wheel lines are the sprinkler systems that we're seeing that are implemented around the state there. In the Colorado River specifically, we have some projects where we have implemented nozzle packages. So if you can see in this picture behind the text, you see the pivot nozzles, which are the small sprinklers hanging on the bottom of those. They look like wires, really. And so what we can do through water optimization is we put on different nozzle packages that allow for a larger droplet size, and it drops these nozzles much closer down to the crop to vastly reduce evaporation during the irrigation system. And with these nozzle packages, it allows the farmers the opportunity to have more management flexibility, especially on low water years. They can put out a smaller amount of water with these nozzle packages and still have an adequate crop yield. And then, like Candice mentioned, sometimes farmers have taken advantage of that system conservation. If it looks like it's just going to be a crop failure altogether, there are some tools that they have to take advantage of. We don't fund through the Agricultural Water Optimization Program, but we work with our partners to be able to share that information and put those tools in our farmers' belts so that they know that the systems and the programs that are available so that they can make water-wise decisions on their farms. And so then moving around the state, the participation that we've had, originally in 2019, the Water Optimization Program was awarded $3 million one-time funding, and then that was repeated again in 2020, or the 2021 legislative period that we started funding in 2022. So with each of those chunks of $3 million in 2019, we were able to fund 16 projects. We didn't have any projects that were funded in the Colorado River Basin specifically in 2019. But in 2022, we started funding projects. This is a total of projects, not specific to the Colorado River Basin. But you can see how the program has grown. Really in the 2022 legislative session is when we really got our shot in the arm, or 2021, excuse me, legislative session when we got a shot in the arm, and we got the program was awarded ARPA funding, which is the American Rescue Plan Act funding that came from the federal government, and we were awarded $70 million. And that allowed us to solicit for much more applications. And we started having multiple application periods per year. And you can see the numbers trending with that, with 140, 86, and then 92 funded projects. You'll notice here as well on this slide that we do have projects that cancel. I think it's extremely important to note, like I mentioned previously, that the other half of this financial burden falls on our farmers and ranchers. So 50% of the total project cost is up to them to install. During COVID specifically, that was a very difficult lift. Prices of pipe and pivots and nozzles and sprinkler packages just went astronomically high. And so we had a large number of farmers that it was not economically feasible for them to come up with their 50% of the project cost. And so we had some canceled projects there that happened. Not the norm, but every once in a while it just becomes economically impossible for the farmers to do. So we've obligated $73 million since the program was started in 2019. And then in Senate, with the last legislative session in Senate Bill 277, the program was awarded an additional $200 million. We have not obligated any of the $200 million yet. With the change in the legislation, we had to take a step back. We developed a new water optimization committee, which I'll introduce to you in just a minute. And then we are writing new rules and policies for the program to move forward, as Senate Bill 277 introduced some major changes to Utah water law. And so we want to make sure that we take the time to take our careful steps to ensure that continued success of the program moving forward. So with that, just briefly, the Agricultural Water Optimization Committee is the list you see here on your screen. This was direct legislation from Senate Bill 277. So Commissioner Craig Butters for Department of Ag and Food serves on the committee. Teresa Wilhelmsen, Candice Hasenyager, who's here with us tonight, Dr. Ken White, William Merkley represents the Water Conservancy districts. Jason Morgan is a local farmer and rancher up in Morgan County. He represents our conservation districts. Jeff Hardy serves as our vice chairman and is the Northern Utah agricultural representative. Brett Bunker is the chairman of our committee. He represents Central Utah agriculture. And Brandon Yardley represents Southern Utah agriculture. And so we have some really heavy hitters on this board. I feel very grateful to be able to work with the agency folks that we do, I think it's a nod to how important this program is and how important it is that we have continued success in agricultural water optimization. And I also love that there was careful consideration given that this can be a producer-led board. So Jason, Jeff, Brett, and Brandon all make a living 100% from farming or ranching. And so they are the representatives here that are helping guide these discussions and make decisions with the committee as we move forward. We go forward looking at projected water savings. In historically, some numbers have been thrown out about projected water savings, and those numbers came from estimates on our applicants when they made application to the program. There wasn't really good measurements behind them. There was just some general estimates that were made. And so with the changes that came out of Senate Bill 277, we're collaborating closely with the Division of Water Rights, with Teresa and her wonderful staff to implement the legislative changes to water use data collection so that we can more accurately report the water that agriculture is using, and then the projected saved water that we will have under the new definition in Senate Bill 277. So water that goes through that change application process and can then be used for other uses besides agriculture. Along those lines, most of our funded projects are still in progress, and we have very few annual water usage reports that are complete. The only projects we have that are 100% complete are from 2019. Like I mentioned before, once COVID really ramped up, supply chain was a real struggle for our producers to even get pipe and things ordered. And so we had about a 1-year lag in some project implementation. And we feel strongly at Department of Ag and Food that water usage reporting should occur for multiple years, so it gives us an accurate representation. I like to use the example of this water year that we had. You know, if we were reporting just on 1 year, it would look like agriculture saved a whole lot of water and used a whole lot less water because we had such a phenomenal winter and a wonderful wet spring that almost no farmers irrigated our first crop hay. And so if it's not an accurate representation of a good average, and so we want to be able to show multiple years and a good average that's an accurate representation of the water that we are conserving through this project or through this program. I love this Utah's water budget slide. I love to be able to put in perspective the water that is used by agriculture in the state of Utah. So this is a graph that comes from Division of Water Resources. And as you can see here, this totals, it's an estimate of the total precipitation that the state of Utah gets in every single year. On average, we get 61 million acre feet of precipitation in all factors, in rain and snow. Of that 61 million acre feet, all of the diverted water for agriculture, municipal and industrial, and any other use, any other human use, we divert about 4.7 million acre feet annually. So 7.74% of all of the water that we get in the state of Utah is diverted for human use. 56 million acre feet roughly stay in nature, stay in the natural systems, stay in our streams and lakes and reservoirs. When we break that down into the agricultural use, agricultural uses 6.7% of the total amount, or 79.2% of the diverted amount of water. So you can see on an annual basis, agriculture uses 3.7 million acre feet of water every year statewide to irrigate our crops and make a living in farming and ranching. And then you can see the breakdown here. Landscape irrigation is roughly 600,000 acre feet, and industry and community is roughly 400,000 acre feet, excluding landscape irrigation. So I like to bring that to light just to show that all human diversions from the natural system is actually a very, very small part of the actual diverted water, and the rest remains in nature. And yes, you know, we hear that a lot, that agriculture uses 80% of the water, but I like this slide to put it into context that it is 80% of that 4.7 million acre feet that's diverted every year. Just to put into context what agriculture is using. And then the last thing I would like to discuss is our favorite topic, alfalfa. This topic is one that is constantly talked about, constantly brought up in the media. And I think alfalfa has gotten a really bad rap. And so I like this list that I've put together in conjunction with the Utah Farm Bureau, that these are all of the things that alfalfa does and is as a plant. So alfalfa is a desert plant, and it is extremely drought tolerant. It's very resilient. If it gets water shut off, you know, it can go almost up to 2 years with no water and it will come back. Alfalfa is a very high yielding crop, meaning that we get multiple crops per year off of every cutting. So sometimes with a wheat crop or a corn crop, you only get one crop per year. Alfalfa, and on average in the state, we get 3 to 4 crops every single year off each field. Alfalfa is a perennial crop, which means we plant it once, and it's usually in the rotation, in our crop rotation, for 5 to 6 years, which saves on costs of fuel. It reduces the carbon footprint for our farmers and air quality compared to annual crops that have to be planted every single year. Alfalfa is an extremely water efficient crop. Typically, we water alfalfa once per cutting, so that would be about once a month. Alfalfa would get water. It produces a high calorie and high protein fiber feed source for our beef producers, our dairy producers, and our horse owners around the state. Alfalfa is perfectly suited for Utah's climate. It loves cold temperatures. When it goes into a cold cycle, it improves the quality of alfalfa. Its dry climate aids in harvesting. So we get asked a lot, why don't we just not grow alfalfa here and grow it somewhere else? And it physically is not possible. In the Midwest, it's too hot, humid, and rainy to grow alfalfa. We need long periods of dry time to be able to dry the alfalfa and cure it and put it in a bale. Utah's heat and sunlight provides us that opportunity. Alfalfa is very tolerant to salty soils, which this shouldn't be news to anybody, but we are in the Great Salt Lake Basin, and a Great Salt, or a basin that is full of salt and very salty soils, and alfalfa is highly suited to accommodate salty soils. Like I said, we can get multiple harvests per year. Alfalfa fixes nitrogen, so it pulls nitrogen out of the air and fixes it into the soil, which builds soil quality and reduces fertilizer costs. It can fix nitrogen. Oftentimes we have producers that will plant corn following an alfalfa crop and don't have to fertilize their corn at all. It controls wind and water erosion. It has a very deep taproot and spreads across the surface to help with erosion problems. We have wonderful markets here in the state of Utah. We grow some of the top alfalfa in the nation. Unlike that gets reported often, most of our alfalfa is consumed in the state of Utah, and the other largest percentage is exported to surrounding states, specifically California and Texas. We export some alfalfa there, and we have a wonderful market for that. Again, we have an international reputation, and some of our alfalfa does get cubed and shipped internationally. It's naturally has natural pests, are less tolerant to our climate. So there's an alfalfa leaf beetle that is very prolific down in Texas that does not survive here in Utah. So we ship a lot of alfalfa to Texas. Its autotoxicity limit spreads. Alfalfa is allelopathic, which means that as alfalfa is growing, it puts out its own toxicity into the soil, which reduces weed pressure. So we can spray less chemical herbicides on it. And alfalfa generates close to $800 million every year into Utah's economy because of the wonderful markets that we have established. So I love having the opportunity to talk about alfalfa. When we talk about what crop is the answer, what crop should we be growing, alfalfa is the crop, and there's a very specific reason why we do grow that in Utah. And so we're very proud of the alfalfa production that we have here. So with that, I have a question slide, but we'll wait till the end. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you this evening and look forward to some questions.
Thank you, Hannah. So we've run into some technical difficulties. Our third panelist, Paul Sosi, is apparently on a remote Indian reservation and has not been able to sign into our webinar. And he has no cell phone service. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to hear his perspective on Native American concerns in the Colorado River Basin. I just wanted to say a few things about how important those perspectives are, in that it's estimated that approximately 1/4 of the water supply in the Colorado River could be tied up in tribal water rights. So as we move forward in negotiating the management agreements for the future, it seems that tribal water rights should be a very large part of that equation. As I mentioned before, they were not considered at all in the original 1922 compact. There are 30 federally recognized tribes in the Colorado River Basin, and they are dependent on that water for their survival. You may have been aware that there was a Supreme Court decision in June that affected the ruling for Navajo water rights in the state of Arizona. And in that ruling, they decided that although the tribal water rights exist, that the United States and different states had no obligation to quantify those or to make sure that the tribes were allotted their water. So there are a lot of issues that need to be addressed in this area. And I really am so sad that Paul couldn't be here to educate us more on that topic. Unfortunately, I'm not that familiar with all the issues. I know there are a lot of them and that they are going to be a major part of the negotiations going forward. But I guess we'll have to leave it with that as he's not able to join us. And I apologize for that. So Jan, should we go ahead and move on to some questions and see where that takes us?
Yes, we have a few questions right now. The first one is probably for Candice. It's an attendee who wishes to remain anonymous. But this individual wants to know who participated in the systems conservation pilot program this year. Was it governments, ranchers, others? Can you answer that question?
Yeah, I don't have a list of the exact participants, but there were some irrigation companies, some municipalities, some in industry. So it was a variety of people from all different levels. And I would say, just to clarify, I mentioned, short-term fallowing or leasing, and that was part of the projects that came in. In addition to that, there were a couple of projects that were based on switching of crops or split season leases to fallow land for part of the season. And there was also some storage and lease projects that came in. So it wasn't just, I made it sound like it was only kind of like fallowing projects, but there were a variety of projects that came into Utah. But it was a variety of entities that applied and received the system conservation pilot projects.
Great. Thank you. The next question comes from Nikki Nelson. And she's interested in knowing, does cloud seeding take water away from other states? And does it have to be coordinated with them?
It's a great question. So the atmosphere is pretty amazing that it's not one finite bucket. It keeps picking up water as it moves along, as it goes over rivers and lakes and things, and as water evaporates. So it doesn't take away. The studies that I've seen show that there's positive downwind effects up to 100 miles and then negligible after that, just because there's always so much going on in the atmosphere. We do coordinate with other states through a number of different associations where we talk about, our different cloud seeding projects. We learn from each other. One of the things that we did just the end of September, we had a cloud seeding symposium where we brought in experts from other states, kind of introduced the whole topic of cloud seeding, brought in experts to discuss it, talked about what other states are doing, then workshopped it as well. So we do try to coordinate with other states and learn from each other.
Right,
And
thank
I
you.
should say across the Western states, pretty much everyone cloud seeds.
Another question from this anonymous attendee. And again, I think it's directed to you, Candice. Can you describe the system that brings water to northern Utah from the Colorado? What kind of shape is the system in?
Sure. And just to clarify that one a little bit more, so I was referring to the Central Utah project. So this is a system that was authorized in 1956 to move water from the Colorado River basin side of Utah. And I probably said Colorado River, but what I meant is on the Colorado River basin in Utah. So it moves water in Utah from the Uinta Mountains, Duchesne, and Uinta County, and brings it over into the Wasatch Front. So it has taken, several years to work through. I think they've finished the project. It includes a number of different units, including, if you think of like starvation, that's part of the Central Utah project. There's an aqueduct that brings water from Upper Stillwater all the way through the watershed to Current Creek to Strawberry, and then pipes it over into the Wasatch Front. So it is a large and complex system. As far as shape, it depends on the age of which each of these units were put into place. Like all things, the older we get, the little bit more rougher time that we have doing what we need to do. And so there's, opportunities to evaluate the infrastructure, the age of it, and that is done by Central Utah Water Conservancy District. And so they maintain that system.
Great, thank you. We have another question. We have a question from David Bennett. We're most likely experiencing aridification, a changing of the climate, and where precipitation will fall and whether it will be in the form of snow or rain. The ideas discussed tonight are excellent, but I fear that it is too little, not enough funding, and a shortage of time to accomplish. A few months ago, Professor Ben Abbott, he's from BYU, made the statement that if we grew crops to feed people rather than to feed animals for people to eat, that we would have plenty of water in the Great Salt Lake Basin. And perhaps, Hannah, this is for you, or Candice, if you'd like to answer too, I think you could just chime in.
Yeah, I would be happy to answer that. Our animals, the protein products that we produce here in the state of Utah through our beef and lamb and dairy, utilize those plants very well. I would be interested to know where Professor Abbott got that information. It's important to note that our beef production in specific and lamb production is produced on areas where you cannot grow crops. In our ranges, our high mountain areas, there's no irrigation water, very unfavorable climates, and we can put animals in those areas that can harvest the vegetation that's there and turn it into an extremely valuable protein product for human consumption. And so I would question whether if we just grew food for people instead of food for animals, if that is valid information. Our animals do a really good job at converting food in, plants into valuable protein to feed our population.
Thanks, Hannah. A question from Mary Bostic. Well, it's not really a question. She's just commenting that she really appreciated Norma's comments about the tribal concerns and wishes that we could have heard from our other panelists, and hopes that that's an opportunity that might happen later. So another question from David Bennett. What steps are being taken to address the extremely serious situation that we're in? Should the Great Salt Lake dry up, the consequences are beyond calculation. Last winter's snowfall was likely a product of climate change, not an end to the drought. I think that's you, Candice.
Yeah, I agree with David 100%. I think the risks and the issues that we have regarding Great Salt Lake and Colorado River issues, these are huge issues. It's how I spend my day is talking about these and working through these. I think there are lots of opportunities to do more, to, you know, use our water more wisely and to really dedicate water to Great Salt Lake. It is tricky. It is, I will tell you, it is hard. It is not, these are the things that we're trying to do are not simple, and they are not without consequences. And so I think that that's where that coordination and collaboration can really come in, to work with existing water users, to work with our federal partners. I am in meetings with, you know, Commissioner Steed, who you guys heard from in your previous webinar, about how do we make meaningful differences and to save Great Salt Lake, and what are the steps that we can do. There's a lot of ideas on the table, and we are incorporating those into his strategic plan that's due out in November. One of the things that we're working on is to get federal support through the Inflation Reduction Act. I try to stay away from acronyms, so I like catch myself about to say an acronym. But you know, to use these Inflation Reduction Act funds, and so we're working with the Bureau of Reclamation to try to get access to a good chunk of funds to bring to Great Salt Lake. That once again is not straightforward, and so it is. I agree that it is a serious thing and that we need to make serious actions. I think the legislature has shown their commitment to do that. I have not seen in my 16 years the legislature ever commit $1 billion for water conservation, and infrastructure projects previously ever in my 16 years. And so I think the legislature is committed. And I totally agree that 1 year is not gonna save us, right? It takes a little pressure off, which gives us opportunity to implement a lot of the things that were funded, because a lot of these things don't happen overnight. Like secondary metering is great. It's going to take years to get it in the ground. We're working as fast as we can, and I know the secondary water suppliers are working as fast as they can to get the meters in the ground, but it takes time to do these things. The other thing is that I think there really needs to be a shift in our kind of culture and the way we act. One of the things that I experienced when I was in Israel is they have a culture of doing what is right for the good of the people, and this whole kind of service-oriented mindset, where I feel like sometimes, and I'll say not just in Utah, but the United States, is like, well, what's in it for me? If I conserve, what do I get? Or I'll conserve when the neighbor down the street does, or whatever it is. And I think we need to get away from that kind of mindset of what's in it for me to how can we all come together and work on this together? Because I can tell you the problem's hard. It is not easy, and it's not straightforward.
No, it's very complicated. Norma, you had a couple questions that you wanted to ask our panelists. I think you might be muted.
I'm losing it. Yeah, and I was wondering, what are other states doing with agricultural water optimization? Are there new techniques out there that Utah hasn't undertaken yet, or are there more, innovations on the horizon?
Yeah, thank you. Wonderful question. I know a lot of our surrounding states, I've specifically talked to some producers that we work with or know up in Idaho, and they are doing some of the exact same things we're doing, and starting with metering. A lot of Idaho is irrigated with pivots, and so they can put meters right on those sprinkler systems there. And we do have some new innovations coming, as part of Senate Bill 277, it put into buckets, a specific amount of money for telemetry and being able to automate some of our irrigation systems. One thing that we're also doing at the Department of Ag is focusing holistically. We have a soil health program, and looking at how, if we take care of our soils and we take care of the environment, how much more benefit we get for the water that we put on the ground. And so we're looking at that. We work with farmers all the time for soil health practices or reduced tillage practices that are just a benefit for everything that we can do. And so we do have some new innovations, when we talk with Utah State. I think we're pretty up to speed. There are a few things, there's been a lot of focus on drip systems. Sometimes drip systems in Utah are difficult because of our very salty soils and very acidic water, high pH levels that we have in our soils. So we work through some of those. Some of those are just not feasible on a large scale, but a lot of our smaller producers and vegetable growers are using those drip systems and automation to be able to have moisture probes down in the soil at various levels, and then we can automatically irrigate based on those moisture levels.
Thanks. Another question that just came to mind for Hannah. A couple of years ago, there was a presentation in the legislature, some committee meeting, about growing feed for cattle, sort of hydroponically. And it was, I can't remember the name of the actual method.
Fodder system.
The fodder system.
Yeah.
So has that gotten any traction? It's at least on the face of it, it seemed like it would use a lot less water and also free up the land used for growing alfalfa for other purposes.
Has some traction. We have some private companies that have reached out and want to visit with the Water Optimization Committee to see if it's a practice they would implement. In the past, we have not funded fodder systems because by and large, they use municipal water to run their system because they need a very, very clean water source to do that. So we didn't feel like it was a benefit directly to agricultural water. It was just another agricultural system that was using another type of water. So we will be looking at those with a committee moving forward to see if it's a practice that they would like to fund in the future.
Great, thank you. And then Candice, this is probably an unanswerable question.
That might be my life, Norma.
Well, then we'll just get on.
No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead. Go for it.
Do you think that voluntary conservation measures are going to be enough to address our water issues in the future? Or are we going to have to start implementing more restrictive measures like, they've done in Las Vegas and Phoenix and San Diego?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think that's kind of where we're going, to be honest. Right, like part of, and we're doing it with, I'll say, the carrot approach, right, where those, for example, with our landscaping incentive program, those residents that want to apply and receive those funds, they have to live in a municipality that has adopted water efficiency standards for new construction. And so those standards require a limited amount of turf. And it depends on where you're at in the state and in what region, because we have a very diverse state. Logan is not the same as St. George, as we all know. So we have to take into consideration regional differences. But that those landscaping and those water efficiency standards limit how much grass you can have, no grass in areas less than 8 feet, because that's really hard to irrigate, right? No overhead drip irrigation or no overhead spray irrigation in, planting areas like bed areas. So I think that is the way we're going right now. Like I said, we're doing it more with a carrot approach. But that being said, I think there's only so much water. And so we're going to have to get to the point where we're saying this is the way it has to be moving forward. One of the, I think, benefits of our current situation is we're already changing how we're growing, right? We're not growing exactly as we did even a decade ago. Our lots are smaller. Our housing type is changing. I mean, how many have seen apartment buildings going up, in the cities that they drive through, right? We're changing our housing types. We're having smaller families. And so there is a change to our water use on the municipal scale. And then I think in agriculture, I mean, I can't tell you how much respect I have for farmers and the work that they do and the efforts they put into the land and the water stewards that they are. I think most of them want to do the best job as they can. And I, think that they will continue to look for ways to modify their practices and to use less water. Because at the end of the day, if they can use less water and then be more resilient during, the last 2 years of drought, when about 70% of farmers were cut off, where they didn't have access to water their crops, they're gonna make those changes. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. As with everything, we have those that are like our early adopters who are like, oh, let's implement this right now. We have those that are like, I'll wait till I see what everyone else does. And we have our late adopters. So we know that that's kind of part of our process. And we see that even whether it's in agriculture or in municipal water use and our landscaping changes. But I think there are lots of opportunities to reduce how much water we use. Eventually, it probably will come to higher prices and probably more restrictions, but that'll be on the local level that those decisions will be made, unless the state legislature makes a different decision. But that's kind of out of my hands at this point. It's on the local level.
Right. I have a question, but I'm going to go to this other one first, which is again about alfalfa. Can you give us some accurate data about the percentage of Utah alfalfa that's sent to China? What percent goes to other countries outside the U.S.?
Yes, I can pull that data information and give you that. If I can send that at a later date, or Norma, I can share that with you. It's actually a much smaller amount. Let me find that exact data before I rattle off a number that's incorrect.
Okay, great. So my question, and I'm not sure this is the right group, but I'm going to ask it anyway. The Great Salt Lake Basin Management Plan that's underway, that's supposed to go till what, 2027 or something like that. And as I understand it, it's going to help to establish a water budget for each of the sub-basins within the larger Great Salt Lake Basin. To me, I mean, in our water study, we saw examples in Australia and other places where that's something that's done every year. They calculate the amount of water they anticipate, they budget it, they allocate it out on an annual basis to various places. And it seems like a logical approach to the management of water. And I'm wondering if that's the outcome of this study or this management plan that's underway.
Thanks, Jan. I'm happy to talk about this project. It is one that is near and dear to my heart, as my office is trying to corral it and lead this effort with some amazing team members. Laura Vernon, Todd Stonley, Jake Sarago are all doing a great job. So this is an effort that came out of the 22 legislative session, 2022, with HB 429 that put water resources in charge of doing this Great Salt Lake integrated watershed assessment. Sorry, I might sneeze. But in addition to that, so there was $5 million appropriated as part of that legislation. And then the Division of Water Resources put in an application to the Bureau of Reclamation Basin Study Program, and we got another $3.1 million, so a total of $8 million to do this study. We've taken the first year, we're about at our year mark, to implement or to do a work plan. And so that will be coming out mid-November and will be open for public comment. And so to your point, Jan, the purpose of this is really to understand kind of the water budget of the system, right? We know within each of the watershed, how much water is coming in, how much water is being used, what are the processes that are going on in the lake, how do surface water and groundwater relate to each other, understand all the different hydrology components. So that is the goal of it. And then to be able to do analysis and scenario development of what happens if the climate changes this way or that way. What if our temperatures increase more than they are? What if we get more rain, more of our precipitation is rain than snow? What are the trade-offs of all of these different things? So looking at this kind of larger scenario development. And so this is a planning model to help us understand the impacts of the decisions that we make. Right now, with the current state law, we don't allocate water on the same model as that Australia does, that in the example that you gave. We have a prior appropriation doctrine that we follow based on people's seniority of their water rights. And that's currently how the state appropriates or how the distributes our water. That being said, lots of things change. Water laws change all the time. And so it really depends on what the legislature chooses to do into the future. We are not anticipating that there will be any big changes to how we distribute water, how the state engineer, I should say, distributes water. That may be another interesting webinar to bring on our state engineer and have her talk about how water is distributed in the state. But from the Basin Integrated Plan, which is our new coin name, right? Because we're taking this watershed assessment and the basin study, and we put it together into a Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan. But part of that analysis is there's a lot of things going on Great Salt Lake, right? And maybe I could rattle them all off, but there's a lot going on. And so this effort is trying to capture all the things that are going on, identify where there's gaps, and then kind of come up with an action plan coming out of it, as well as that trade-off analysis and this really big comprehensive model. So is definitely more information on our website, and I'll put that in the chat so folks can see it.
Great, thank you. And I apologize for getting off onto Great Salt Lake rather than concentrating on the Colorado River. But I did have one other thought. I mean, you are on the authority. I can't recall exactly the name of the Colorado River organization that you represent Utah on. So you must be aware of some of the tribal issues and some of the discussions that are going on about the tribal issues and their water rights and how this might all get resolved. Do you have something that you can share with us about that?
Yeah, I mean, generally, every state has kind of taken a different approach on how they resolve their reserved water rights is what we call them, right? So these are those tribal water rights. Some states choose to litigate, that if a tribe wants to, resolve their water rights, their reserved water rights, that they have to pretty much take the state to court. So for example, maybe Nevada's like that. But in Utah, we've chosen to work with tribes and to negotiate our reserved water rights. And so one of the most successful examples, and another great reason to have the state engineer on here, is the reserved Navajo rights that was recently signed off on. It's still going through some additional processes, but that was, an 18-year long effort that was successfully signed off earlier this year, I think 2023, or maybe it was last year. I think it was last year, now that I think about it. But I think that that's one of the things that Utah is committed to. And I know I've heard our state engineer say something similar, is that, we want to negotiate these reserved water rights and make sure that we're taking care of the tribes in Utah. All of the tribal rights that are in Utah in the Colorado River Basin states will come out of Utah's apportionment. So 23% of whatever is there. To Norma's point earlier, we do it by percentages. So we get 23% of whatever's there. And so the tribes within the state of Utah will be a part of that apportionment, whatever the 23%. So, and they have the most senior rights. And so as soon as those reserved water rights are signed and negotiated, then, they have a pretty pretty great, right?
Thank you. Norma, I don't see any other questions. David Bennett has provided some comparisons of amount of the amount of water it takes to grow a pound of beef versus a row of tomatoes and some other things like that as well. But I think we've discussed this maybe enough.
Okay.
If society is willing to go be vegetarians, I think David's got some great points. I think once again, these questions are not easy, and they're easy for some, but you're asking people to change and to do things differently, which, if that's the will of people, it is tricky, where there are a lot of people who like to eat beef and chicken and those type of things. So it's tough. And you got to realize that, these farmers are operating within what makes sense for them, not only on the ground, but even economically, of where they can sell and make a living. I think Hannah could attest that most farmers are living on the edge, and they're not getting rich by farming, most of them. Maybe I've overspoken, Hannah, so you can correct me.
Oh, I appreciate that very much. And I also think it's important to keep in perspective. We've paved over most of our prime and unique farmland that would be extremely valuable for vegetable production, or a row of tomatoes. And what we're left with is a lot of the ground that's remaining is very marginal. So it might not be ideal for that production, but it is ideal for the production of forage. And we also do grow a lot of feed for people as well. But you can think along the Wasatch Front, think down in Utah County, no more orchards. In Perry, no more orchards. Davis County was also orchards, and we've paved over a lot of that very, very prime farm ground with homes. And so we do the best we can with the farm ground that we have left.
That's good. That's a good point. Well, if there are no further questions, I'd like to thank Candice and Hannah for joining us. And I, again, apologize for the technical difficulties that prevented Paul from joining us, because I think he had a very valuable perspective to share with us. And as negotiations continue for how to handle the management of the Colorado River system in the future, maybe perhaps we could revisit that and get his perspective at that time. So just one final thing. The water study, or the water report, excuse me, is available at the League of Women Voters website, LWVUtah.org, as well as as recordings of the Great Salt Lake webinar that occurred earlier, and tonight's webinar will also be available, I believe, as of tomorrow. So again, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Jan, for handling the questions, and to Peggy for doing all the Zoom things. And I hope everybody has a good evening. Thank you for attending. Take care.
Thanks, Norma. Thanks, Jan. Thanks, Peggy.